blessed good morning to all our listeners. It's 6 minutes past the hour 11 here in studios. And as we promised, we're here again with another session of Leadership Plus with Rev John Lewis. Yes, we're about to start today's session. Rev John Lewis is the director of GITE, the Grenada Institute for Technical or for Theological Education. Today in Leadership Plus, we're discussing the book Canoeing the Mountains. Blessed morning to you, Reverend Lewis. How are you today?
Good to be with you and share in a time of learning and discussion on this very interesting title, Canoeing the Mountains. So it's a real pleasure to be with you again today, Abigail.
All right, it's nice to have you here. Could you tell us about things at GITE? Could you remind us of some of the things, that are offered and so?
Thank you. So during this week, actually, we're closing a session tonight we're talking about the whole issue with Dr. Jerome Daly on the issue of intimacy with God. We are talking about how you should inculcate Christian disciplines in your personal life, times of silence, having a Sabbath, having a retreat, having a time of deep reflection, because the challenge for all of us is to avoid the barrenness of busyness. It is easy to have our lives crowded by activity. Most of us are driven by mere sense of how we function as leaders, as pastors, as politicians, as business leaders. But unless we take the moments for silence, the moment to have the retreat or take the Sabbath, as we would call it, then we are on a treacherous road to burnout and ineffectiveness in our leadership.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. That is excellent information. A few weeks ago, we're going to jump right into today's discussion, the Canoeing the Mountains. And I know a few weeks ago we spoke about reframing. And
Yes.
I noticed that the author Todd Balsinger saw the need to address uncharted and unfamiliar as the body of Christ. Can you just give us an overview of what we are talking about today?
Great. So this book, the title is called Canoeing the Mountains. It is written by Todd Balsinger, and it was written in 2015. And so the three purposes of this book as listed by the author. One, to reframe this moment of history as an opportunity put before us by God. Second, to recover the calling of the church to be a truly missional movement that demands leadership. And three, to discover even more than the uncharted territory around us, the capacity for leadership within us. So those are the three primary purposes of this book, written by author Todd Balsinger. And all these books are available on Amazon. You can buy a Kindle version, which is a lot more economical, and you can have them on your phones. You could travel with them anywhere you go. So this is another interesting book on leadership, an interesting title indeed, about how we canoe in uncharted territories.
Right. So that word uncharted territory. What really is uncharted territory?
Right. Well, it's like the pandemic,
Right,
right?
definitely.
So nobody could have imagined that
Mm-hmm.
over a year we still have issues
Mm-hmm.
with the COVID-19
Mm-hmm.
virus. Um, we were locked down in Grenada from March of 2020, and of course, thankfully, we are opened up for
Mm-hmm.
most cases, but still in nations around the globe,
Shut down.
they're completely shut
There even
down.
some even going back to shutdown now. Australia, I think this week is
Right.
back on the shutdown.
So it definitely that describes for us
Mm-hmm.
in a really practical sense what is uncharted territory.
Right. So the leader's task is great
It is
because
far
it's
greater
on.
than pre-COVID, you
Mm-hmm,
know.
mm-hmm.
Yes.
It's uncharted. It's never been
Yes.
before. Right. So we know that in Christendom or serving God, that being in alignment with God should be of paramount importance. How can
Exactly.
yeah? How
Mhm.
can a church be reminded of its position or our position that we have in God?
Right. So this book calls us back to the movement
Mm-hmm.
in history when the church faced even crisis. Remember that pandemics are not new,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
since creation.
That's right.
Um, we read the historical review of pandemics before, and of course, in biblical times, it was not considered a pandemic. It was where the whole world was flooded, and you know, if you wanted to be safe, you actually had to
Mm-hmm.
go
Mm-hmm.
into this ark of safety,
Yes.
and that may be an illustration of what the world experienced then. It's like um, to be safe then, it was going to the ark that people mocked and laughed at, and
Mm-hmm.
then
Mm-hmm.
the flood came and the world was destroyed, and except for a few people. So it brings us back in historical perspective in terms of how there is the response of the church and
Mm-hmm.
people are, because our focus is primarily on understanding how God has orchestrated and designed us to fulfill His mission in every era,
Mm-hmm.
in every century. It was interesting on BBC. They were doing a recall that something very, very historical and very significant happens every 500 years.
Okay.
And they were looking back at what happened in the last 500 years and before that.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you take a hard look at how cycles of time,
Yes.
just like cycles in our personal lives,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
perhaps for some of us, it is 5-year cycles. Things
Right.
change. There is moving, families move, or there is a job change, or
Mm-hmm.
there is
Mm-hmm.
a move from location. You may
Yes.
go to another country or nation to live in.
Mm-hmm.
So change is just, you know, we can't repeat it too often. Is the most constant thing. So we have to understand God's perspective in how He uses us
Mm-hmm.
and captures our imagination in these uncharted times, in these unusual times, and to still function at the best of our capacity.
Right. So as we sojourn uncharted waters, our leaders, because they're on the front, they're the tip of the sword.
Yes.
You know, how can a leader begin to approach or to think? How does he think or program his mind when approaching uncertain and uncharted waters?
Good. Like the book mentioned, one of the purposes is to recover the calling of the church.
Mm-hmm.
Because the calling of the church is to be truly missional,
Right.
and it is a movement that demands leadership.
Mm-hmm.
So our point of reference and our starting point is that we understand how God is working in the universe.
Right.
God is always on the move,
Mm-hmm.
and He's not taken by surprise of any pandemics or any global change,
Yes.
whether it's in climate change.
Mm-hmm.
We've been just watching the news today about the heat wave
Right.
happening across the northern parts of the USA and Canada, and people are in panic. Of course, one of the disasters that we are watching is the collapse of this building in Florida,
Wow.
where they still can't find probably 150 persons still
So many
out of that
families
tragedy.
affected. Yeah.
But God is not taken by those kinds of things that cause us to panic
Exactly.
and cause us to fear. So when we anchor our faith and understand how God is moving in the times in which we live, we get perspective. Perspective makes the whole world of difference. I remember when we were children, we would look out at the ocean and we would think that was the end of the world,
Yeah.
where the horizon meets, as it were, the end of the earth. But as you travel and as you expand on boats, on planes, you realize there's a great
That's right.
expanse of waters, and the world is far greater
Yes.
than we really see it with our natural eyes from where we live within our own circumference, as it were.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are here with Rev John Lewis, and we are discussing canoeing the mountain, and we're inside of Leadership Plus. I invite you to send your questions. You can do so on 403-1031, or you can look at us on YouTube and you can send your statements or comments there as well.
Good. So, understanding uncharted territory talks about the world in front of us is nothing like the world behind of us.
Right.
So that is so pertinent today. All of us have been affected by the travel bans. Many of us would have been in different parts of the world, even now, if it were possible to do all the international travel. All of the international conferences was cancelled
Yeah.
or postponed
Yeah.
over the last year. So what is before us is far greater than what is behind us. And then it's how you as a leader understand the times in which we live and how we adapt to the change in times. Thankfully, the medium of social media and all the social platforms, for example, we can stay any part of the world and communicate all of our meetings, most of our meetings on Zoom. You can stay in any country of the world and work in other parts of the globe. And that's the kind of environment we live. And as is projected, we will not return to pre-COVID days.
No, it won't.
So these are uncharted times. But how do we prepare?
Yes.
The preparation is 90% of the success.
Right.
You fail to prepare, you prepare to fail,
Be prepared
basically.
to fail, definitely.
So how do we, as leaders, whether we are pastors, whether we are prime ministers, whether we are business executives, a youth leader, or family member, a school teacher, principals, executives, how do we prepare? And for most cases, it has caught us unprepared initially, but we are now learning some new skills. Those of us who were not familiar with
Zoom,
and other things,
Skyping and so forth.
Skyping, and then all the mechanics of doing Facebook Live,
Right, yeah.
and all those wonderful things.
Got a lot of people off guard, yeah.
Right, but we are getting caught
Yes.
up, and then who knows what is the next wave.
Yes.
So it really prepares you. So we're talking here about your own personal growth and personal development.
Right.
Each of us has to take personal responsibility for our own development. And there are so many opportunities today. Of course, online training, online learning. So many people are after us to buy their programs.
Right.
And they're offering all kinds of programs, and you have to be careful. We have seen people, they've been caught up with the influx of join this and buy this and join this program, to realize that they are fake programs. And basically all they wanted was your money. And the sad thing about this is that once they have your credit card information, it's hard to retrieve it from them, and they keep charging your account. So we want to encourage all of our younger people in particular who may be tempted to go and sign up for a program. Be careful and check out the source from which this is coming. Even adults, we're tempted as well to want to engage in a particular program or services offered, and being affected negatively. But they are good programs, of course, and so we must determine what is right, what is correct, and what is fake information.
Right. Right. So The dynamics of a church is different in many ways to any other organization. And the leadership, as we've been discussing so far of the church, is often faced with uncharted territory. What are some of the lessons and or guidelines for facing the aforementioned, uncharted territory? What are some of the guidelines that leaders can use to face? We know that there are about 5 areas or so.
Right. So we have to understand the relationships that we have in church. Um, John Maxwell would remind us that people have to buy into you before they buy into your vision.
Right.
So as a pastor, as a bishop, as a leader, and we have great titles within the church, archbishops, apostles, and people assign different titles to themselves. But whatever leadership role that you have within the church or audience, as you specify, is that a lot of the success and growth and development within our congregation largely depend upon the relationship that exists between you as the leader and your membership.
Right.
In every organization, it's a principle that applies, that if people do not believe in you as the leader, they're not going to buy into your vision.
Right.
So as leaders, transparency, accountability to the membership of your church, integrity, those are issues that, universal issues that leads to success and growth and development. Because in any company, organization, the church, we can't go alone. Because the tendency sometimes for us as leaders, because usually you're head of the group.
Right.
You're thinking along long time before most of your people get caught up with you.
Right.
But you cannot be so far ahead of your congregation that you leave them behind.
Yeah.
And they lose their way in the process. So you have to bring them alongside you. And that's a biblical principle. There's no greater model than that of the greatest leader that ever walked this universe, and that's Jesus Christ.
Yes.
And he took 12 men with him, and ladies, of course, were part of his leadership team and disciples. We sometimes forget that you had the Marys and the Marthas and all other women involved in the leadership of Jesus. They entertained him, their homes. We are not given all the details about the involvement, but of course, the women were a vital part of Jesus' ministry. But so we have to bring people alongside us. Relationship is critical in any organization, the church in particular, where we provide opportunities for growth in the church.
Yes.
The principles in the book of Acts is that they had 4 basic principles for church growth. One was that they had fellowship, and that meant not just shaking hands and, saying, asking, God bless you, and, those kind of, it was more than that. It was a practical fellowship where they were concerned about not only the spiritual needs, but the physical and social needs of the people. They shared what they had with one another. And perhaps that's almost becoming a lost concept in many organizations, where we think of I, myself, and I, but we lose out in that battle. It's a losing battle. We cannot go that alone. And Jesus demonstrated that you have to bring your people alongside of you. It is a law of momentum. How do you build momentum within your church? It's called a big mo. And that means that you have to excite your people with a vision. They have to capture the vision. That's why we have to write it down. Yes, make it plain.
Yes.
Our
so
vision
that the runner could
can't be a paragraph.
Right.
Basically 1 or 2 statements that capture the attention of your followers.
Yes.
And we see that placed in some businesses, some churches, organizations may have something written up that people can recall quickly. So what's the vision of your church?
Yes.
And if our leadership, if our membership is unclear about its own vision, of course, if the blind lead the blind, we all end up in bad places as ditches. So relationship is one of the critical lessons that we learn from this text as well. And then transformation. Transformation carries the concept you can be changed, especially as a leader. Transformation is probably described um, when a caterpillar metamorphosis.
Right.
Yes,
Yeah,
a
it changes.
caterpillar turns
Yeah.
out into a beautiful butterfly.
Yes.
It's an internal and external transformation,
It's a big change.
a huge change. And at the heart of this book is the conviction that we can be in communal transformation. So transformation is personal.
Yes.
Um, if we are not transformed in our mind, like Scripture talks about, it says, "Be not conformed, to the practices of the world, but be transformed by the renewing of our
So
mind."
that's change.
Yes,
That's
complete,
constant change.
constant renewal.
Yes. Yeah.
And so we don't see the processes of the caterpillar. We may see it crawling around and then suddenly, but that has been taking place long before we see
Long.
the beautiful butterfly.
Right.
And so the time that it takes, sometimes it looks like it's a long drawn out process for us. Sometimes we as leaders don't like the process. Especially if we like to be visible and on stage, which most of us you have to be at some point. But in the process of using the analogy of the caterpillar, we don't see all the inner workings.
Right.
And that
Right.
sometimes when you're hidden away
Yeah.
from the public, perhaps you're pursuing an education that nobody knows about.
Okay.
But you are up 2 o'clock in the morning and you're burning the morning oil because it's past midnight by then.
Yeah.
And you're slugging away at self-improvement
Right.
and self-development.
Right.
And then later on people may see the butterfly, as it were. But that takes sacrifice.
It does. It
And
does.
so one
A
of the
lot hard
concepts
work.
in this book is that there's not only relationship, but one of sacrifice, the price we're willing to pay. And so when we see success in an organization, or we see growth in a church,
Right.
it is not happening overnight.
Overnight is hard work over time.
And it's not just because you came up with a brilliant idea, it's because it has taken a process.
Right.
We see the beautiful baby after 9 months.
9 months.
But you don't know the pain sometimes and the ups and downs.
Yeah.
Moms understand
Yes.
that greater
Yes.
of having the inception of the birth of the child, from the day of inception throughout the pregnancy, and then we see the beautiful baby at the end of 9 months, some more or less. And but that's the stages of what the process is similar to that of becoming pregnant with a vision. You're impregnated, as it were, with a vision from God. It goes through these several stages from inception to birth, and all the changes that happens within the mother's body, as well as in the baby's development and growth. But that's an illustration of how we mature from one strength to another until we are born and comes into this world. And then you have to still kick to get out into this world.
Yeah. And as you change, there are things that will come up that have not come, you have not dealt with before. So then you have to learn the skill of adapting.
Great. So, as a mother, now, if we continue the analogy, I mean, the entire life of a family is changed, whether it's a single mother or it's a entire family. It's changed once a baby comes into your life.
Yes,
you
definitely.
lose sleep.
Sleep deprived for a long time.
For a while, of course. Thankfully, it's not forever.
No, they go pretty fast.
They go
these
very
days.
quickly, of course. So we have to be willing to do the process and to make the sacrifices. During the pregnancy of a mother, the family is affected, of course, but the activities are curtailed in terms of public activity, things that you would custom to do, those change. So in the process of your own leadership role and development, a person does not become a leader overnight. It's definitely a development process, and this the commitment to stick to the task. Like we would challenge our students, don't just sit in class and just listen, but become actively involved. Commit to writing your papers, the discipline of academic work, hard academic work that quick sharpens your mind and thinking. So we challenge people on a regular basis within our leadership programs. And one of the great programs that we have completed here is Equip, in which many leaders from every sector of the society were involved. And so we challenge each person to still jump in to some of our programs that we offer. But in terms of the book, it says that leadership, therefore, is about the transformation of a congregation so that they collectively can fulfill the mission they corporately have been given. Collectively and corporatively. So whether it's in the church, in a collective sense, but also in a business, corporatively, we have understand the transformation that can take place when we understand and fulfill the mission that has been enunciated and elucidated and made clear and plain, so that the person at the lowest level of the chain in terms of business can understand and they participate. I'll give you one example. So two guys were in a building project, and building and construction is a great thing happening all over the world. And so strangers passed by and asked one of the guys, he said, "What are you doing? What are you trying to accomplish here?" He said, "I'm just helping putting up a building here. I'm just a laborer. I'm just helping to complete this concrete structure." And then he asked the other person, "What is he doing?" He said, "I'm building the finest architectural building that will provide businesses and income for people who will benefit from the completion of the structure." So one had basically, it was going to job every day, check in 8 o'clock, check out 4 o'clock, and that's your job. You're just mixing concrete. And while they were doing the same kind of job, the other person had the vision of what the end product would look like. It was not just to come to work every day, but to see the end result of this beautiful architecture. He could see it in his mind. He could see how beautiful this structure would look like, with all the meticulous details and all the intricacies and finishing product of this building that they were putting up. So perspective. And so we have to give people perspective. Why do we come to an organization? Why do we belong to a particular congregation? It's not just to make up numbers. Trust me, not just going to a particular, in the church context, to make up a number. But that there's a clear understanding that I'm here with a particular appreciation for the mission and vision and purpose. And the same like businesses. It's either that you have a productive staff that understands the mission, vision, purpose of your organization at every level. When there's the person giving a cart in the supermarket, or the cashier, or the accountant in the office, or the management and staff.
One mind.
Is understanding the purpose of this. So it has to come where there is cooperative understanding and collective buy-in to the vision. Leadership influence produces a thorough and dramatic change in an individual, in people, in the setting, in the circumstance, or in community. So when Daryl Perriman says this, it comes back to the point that if we understand the purpose of our involvement in this unusual time, because we go back to the fact this is uncharted territory.
Very much so.
Then we have to understand that leadership always would influence the change in the individual, in the circumstance, and eventually in the community in which you serve as well. There's one dictionary definition for transformation. It says a thorough or dramatic change in form or appearance. And it uses the word metamorphosis, like we alluded to. Another writer who used some of this material says to us, transform people can transform organizations.
Definitely.
But the transformational journey requires unlearning the existing ways of doing things.
So you gotta adapt.
We have to manage the current crisis
Mm-hmm.
or crises,
Mm-hmm.
but also thinking forward is so critical to remain effective. That's a mouthful.
Yeah.
It takes transformed people to transform an organization. If we're not clear in our own thinking and in our own understanding, we cannot effect transformation.
Right.
And transformation starts in the mind. As a man thinketh in his heart,
So is he.
so is he. So we clear our thinking.
Mm-hmm.
We say remove the cobwebs, to use an analogy.
Mm-hmm.
So it talks about unlearning existing ways of doing things. Of course, we have learned that we cannot do business in the pandemic as pre-COVID.
So true.
Banking is a whole different
Everything
story in
is
terms of
just
business,
changing.
everything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, church services
Are different.
are different.
Yeah. Yeah.
Congregation is different. And
Even socializing.
right.
everything
So
is
even the
changing.
cricket that we're having right there in Grenada.
Exactly. It's changing.
Yeah, we cannot just flock
No,
into the
we
stadium.
can't. We can't anymore.
There are so many stipulations now.
So
I'm sure
many.
that limits
Yes, yeah.
the numbers of us that
Yeah.
become interested
Mm-hmm.
and normally would rush to the stadium and just bring your family, friends with you and have a wonderful, time. So how do we manage the crises?
Right.
So self-management lends itself to managing others.
Definitely.
And so how do I manage myself
Mm-hmm.
in terms of how do I see time, for one example? Is time something that, something that controls you?
Mm-hmm.
Are you run or ruined by the pressure of time? Or do you control, you can either manage yourself or let time manage your life. So what I say to our students and leaders in our programs of training is that you have to manage yourself.
Yeah.
Time management is self-management.
Yes.
We all have 24 hours in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you're the president of the United States or whether
Right.
you are a laborer on the farm,
Mm-hmm.
we have the same number of hours.
Mm-hmm.
And we can determine how effective we want to use those 24 hours that is given to everyone, no matter which class or race or structure that you belong to. You can determine how productive you want to be
Yes.
by managing yourself, so that time does not become like a pressure cooker for you. You're
You have
not
to
under
make
the pressure
yeah,
cooker.
You have to make a determination as to exactly how
Right.
far you want to win and how.
Great. So you have to,
Yeah.
I said to people in management and leadership,
Mm-hmm.
you cannot wake up in the morning and think what you're going to do today.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, you have lost the day already.
Yeah.
Most of the successful managers in business will tell you they start the morning at 4 a.m. Some of us don't like to get up that early. But those are the times for most people when their mind is clear and they can think creatively and they can plan ahead of the day.
Mm-hmm.
But they suggest to us you must take some time each week to have some sense of structure. Of course, given inconveniences that would pop up, incidences that will take place, what your week would look like in a general sense.
Projections.
But more so every evening to think about what your day would look like, given any unusual occurrences, of course.
Yes.
And what I said to my my younger leaders is that you can maximize your day by having a strategy from how do you get from one point A to point B, how much time it's going to take, and what all you need to get done in that particular zone. Let's use Grenada, for example. It applies to every part of the globe. For example, we are here in St. George's area, basically.
Yeah.
And you have to get into the town and you need to pick up a number of things. Now it's end of month, so you're paying bills.
Yeah.
All your bills become due. Rent,
Yeah.
mortgage, light bill, water bills, your
Wi-Fi.
grocery bill, your internet bill,
Internet bill.
your phone bills.
Very important in these days.
Of course. But what can easily happen if we don't even write these things down or have them structured on our phone? You can actually go to Flow to pay a bill, and Flow is in the same building like in the mall,
You're right.
where Digicel is.
Yes. Yeah.
And forget that you can pay your Flow bill. As a matter of fact, online is perhaps the easiest way now, but just for people who still have to physically go.
Commute, yeah.
And realize that you could do all those things. The supermarket is there, your banking is possibly there.
Yeah.
And write those things in a sequence of that I'm going to these points and I'm going to maximize. So it would take me about, give yourself an hour if you're doing 4 or 5 things just for safety.
Yeah.
But there's a tendency, if we do not do this, we can go to this mall, drive probably 45 minutes to get into town by the traffic to get back out. Realize that we forgot that right next door to this
Yes,
building,
yeah.
our light bill could have been paid.
Yeah.
And so you turn around,
Resources
and
are
so you
wasting.
spend
Yeah.
another hour
Yeah.
of frustration because by now the traffic is crawling.
Built up.
And so it's just thinking ahead of what you can accomplish within. And that's why for some of us, we get a number of things done within the same 12-hour block of daylight, as it
Right.
were, 8 to 12 hours, than others who think that we just, run by the seat of our pants, as we say, to get done. So I want to challenge us that in uncharted times, and even more so now, it takes a lot more to think ahead and to plan and to orchestrate, organize the times and how successful you are and how productive your day can be.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, you are logged on to Hope 103.1 FM, and we are here in Leadership Plus discussing with Reverend John Lewis under the topic Canoe in the Mountains. And you can send in your questions, you can send in your comments on 403-1031. And right back to Reverend John. As our conversation is going along, it's more and more you recognize that the leader is really greatly tasked, and in order to move a congregation to a goal or to an objection, the leader must be ready for several uncertain responses. Yes, could you talk to us a little bit more on dealing with uncertain responses?
Great. So there's an interesting Harvard Business Review by McNulty and Marcus in 2020. And the question he asked, are you leading through the crisis or you're managing the response?
Right.
So you can determine whether you are proactive as against being reactive.
Right.
Because the tendency generally is to react to what has happened or what's happening. And so there is no foresight, but there is always hindsight, of course. So he says to us, crisis replete with both complexity and change require executives, leaders to both lead and manage effectively. Addressing the urgent needs of the present is the work of management. You need to make immediate choices and allocate resources. The pace is fast and actions are decisive. Leading by contrast involves guiding people to the best possible eventual outcome over the arc of time. Your focus needs to be on what is likely to come next and readying to meet it. That means seeing beyond the immediate and anticipate the next 3, 4, or 5 obstacles.
Right.
And you can find this on the internet as well, www.hbr.org, in Harvard Business Review. And that's a quote from McNulty and Marcus, a 2020 article. And it's entitled, Are You Leading Through the Crisis or Managing the Response? So whether we are leaders within the church context or business or community leaders, it's asking us to anticipate what are our next steps.
Yes.
So we plan in anticipation. We may not have all the answers. So projections. Good business executives cannot plan a week out or a month out or even a year out. You're thinking the investment that they make in buildings, and you see all the investments in buildings and um, offices being constructed.
Yeah.
They have to be thinking, what is the profit margin for this investment 10, 20 years down the road?
Mm-hmm.
And so within the church context as well, what would we like to see our own sphere of influence look like 5, 10, 15, 20 years even for young people?
Mm-hmm.
What, 10 years now? Next 10 years, they're out of secondary school into college.
Right.
And so how do you prepare the 10-year-old now?
Mm-hmm.
We cannot wait till they are 20 to prepare our 10-year-olds. Now is the time, if we're going to see the result 10 years down the road, when they become qualified in particular fields,
Mm-hmm.
and what their choices are.
Mm-hmm.
So, matter of fact, the Jewish concept is that soon as these babies are born, they're already thinking what they would like this child to become.
Right.
And the historical background to this is that they actually look at these babies, see how they respond, and actually do not give them a name as soon as they are born. You know, we come up with all kind of fancy names for children these days without any sense of meaning. And unfortunately, sometimes we discover that the meaning is totally negative.
Mm-hmm.
So they look at these babies, and perhaps after a year, they would have an official name for this baby.
Right.
Because you're looking at the character traits of these babies, and then they acculturize them, they socialize them
Right.
in a particular trend that they become, whom they see and envision for the babies even at a young age. So when we look at our own structures within our companies and churches, it has to be that we are starting with our children. You know, in a lot of the other worldviews, it's that give us a child and you know, give us a child who is 5 years old and we will change your world.
Okay.
Because they're preparing them for particular experience
Okay.
and training them to accomplish a particular goal or mission within families and within organizations and mindsets. And so how do we inculcate these values? And we can teach leadership principles to children. Yes?
Yes, definitely.
And we always have to go back, how do we train our boys? And we train them differently in most cases than girls.
Yeah.
So giving them responsibilities, equal responsibilities we can find for boys as we do for girls. Because you see the fallout of that when they become adults, young adults, and the responsibility sense of it.
That is a big conversation I hear happening a lot these days, the difference in how we raise boys
socialize the men.
Right.
So we're talking here about how do we manage the crisis and how we anticipate them. And we cannot anticipate every crisis, but your focus needs to be on what is likely to come and be ready for it. Like we said within our church context and church leadership, be ready for the open door, so that when God opens up the door, you're ready to enter through the door. Because there are many doors that may seem close to us right now, but truthfully, we're not ready for that open door.
Yes.
And so within the understanding of sovereignty,
Yes. Yes.
that door is still remaining closed because we are not prepared to enter through the door already prepared for us. So we lead in this unusual times.
Unusual.
We have to reassess our organization. What are the needs of our customers today? The needs are far greater. You have to add technical support and marketing competencies. And Bolsinger in his book reminds us that leadership in uncharted territory requires the transformation of the whole organization. Both leaders and followers will become vastly different people after they have ventured both to live out the mission of God in a changing world. This transformational leadership lies at the overlapping intersection of three leadership components. One, technical competence, relational congruence, and adaptive capacity. So let me just take a few minutes as we may wrap up our time. Technical competence. So we have to perhaps go back to school.
Yeah. COVID brought a lot of us back to school, you know.
Right?
Yeah.
The technical competencies that we all need. Go back and take some computer programming, computer classes, and understand the competency that we need in order to function. Because many companies are asking you to work at home.
Right. Yeah.
So how we have those competencies in that area. But the relational congruence, so develop strong and healthy relationship. Know that we cannot go alone. If you go alone, you won't get far. Your distance in life will be circumvented by your own choice of the Lone Ranger mentality. So go along with people of the same vision, and don't waste time with people who don't have any sense of where they're going. So relational congruence, so there must be a sense that we understand this together.
Yeah.
And then adaptive capacity. Some of us adapt more easily than others. Some of us take longer to adapt to change.
To change, yes.
Adapting to change is a relevant topic and very popular.
Yes.
Change management. It's a concept that businesses are talking about and companies. And change management is critical to the church.
Definitely.
Because in the context of church leadership, we're not seeing the numbers of people coming back to church as they did pre-COVID.
Yeah.
How do you minister to those people that really don't have any interest in coming physically in your space anymore? Adaptive capacity.
Yeah.
And so you have to fill those spaces that are missing. And it comes back to seeking the knowledge, seeking the competencies, asking the questions, and investing in yourself.
Yes.
And, being ignorant is no excuse these days. It's most expensive than knowledge, as somebody says.
Yeah.
So adaptive capacity. You would see the difference between those of us who adapt easily and those who have it a challenge. It's more a challenge when we have to adapt to changes. You see it in the lives of children, even within families. You see how children respond to change differently. And we have to get in the back of the mind, as it were, in their thinking, how they're going to adapt to change, moving from one school to another. How do children adapt to change of environment? We're thinking also of the changes when you have a crisis, like a volcano eruption, and particularly so as we focus on what's happening in St. Vincent. So people are in shelters, and children are asking, why are we sleeping in schools?
Right.
I mean, they're asking their parents, why are we not going home to sleep?
They don't understand what's
Because we know that generally, of course, after school, children want to go home to sleep in their own beds. So you've seen some of the interviews that is something that has come up in a number of the interviews with school children. They miss their beds, their own beds. They miss their pets. Some of them have lost their pets. And they miss their friends playing in the community.
Different environments.
And so changes for them is difficult.
Right.
Staying in a shelter, living in a school for several weeks now and going into months. So how do we help our children and adults even? Because even as adults, you want to be in your space.
Definitely, yes.
When we are moved
your own
into
space,
a situation that
privacy.
is uncomfortable, you don't have all the facilities, you don't have all your privacies, it is really a challenge. So but we grow into those, we grow as a result of these experiences, and we become better adapters
Yeah.
within our experience. So these are uncharted times. These are challenging situations in which we find ourselves. But we have to come back to the fact that adaptation, our technical competencies, our relational congruence, understanding and appreciation of the human capital, like we talk about, we understand the value that
Yeah.
one another bring to this organization or to this company or to this movement.
Yes, yes, it's amazing, you know. Just throughout this conversation, you really begin to appreciate, you know, leadership. And when it's good leadership, you really appreciate the hard work it takes to be an excellent leader in these uncharted times. You know, hence the scripture, pray for your people in leadership. Pray
Yes.
for them. And we must do that as children of God. This is Leadership Plus, and we're sitting with Reverend John Lewis, and we're just about to wrap up today's session. Reverend, you mentioned about the outreach to St. Vincent. Could you update us on what's going on and how?
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. So, in a matter of days now, the 12th of July, we anticipate about 12 to 14 persons, and thankfully mostly men, because it's going to be um, some practical hard work.
Yeah.
So we need strong young men. Will journey to St. Vincent. And so we ask you to pray for us, pray for good health.
Yes.
With some COVID restrictions, particularly returning back to Grenada. That's one of the challenges. And so pray for us that we would get all those clarified within the next week or so. And of course, the financial challenges. Most of our men are unemployed, and so they would appreciate your gifts and giving. And you can give to GUIDE, Grenada Institute for Theological Education. I can announce our banking account here. So it's the Grenada Institute for Theological Education. The account number is 33576. 3003576, and that's at the former Scotiabank, Republic Bank, both in Granans and in St. George's.
Could you repeat the banking information for our listeners?
So it's the Grenada Institute for Theological Education. That's the name of the account, and then the account number is 3003576, and you can verify that as you deposit online. Of course, you can do transfers on your online accounts, and you can go physically into these two outlets in Grenada. But anywhere in the world now, it's possible that you can do transfers if you would like to support this mission, and to be in much prayer for God's protection and God's provision in the next few days, as we pray and as we plan and as we think ahead how God may use us to be a blessing to the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines.
Thank you very much, Reverend John. Remember, St. Vincent and many other countries across the diaspora was good to us in our time of need. So let's be good to them and keep them in our prayers, and, you know, assist financially in any way that we possibly can. Before we, end today's session, is there anything else you would like to add about our topic, Canoe in the Mountains? I found it a bit, like a paradox, an oxymoron, canoe in the mountains. How do you do that? But any parting words?
Great. So, if you've been on a canoe and notice how dangerous these rapids can be, flowing through a mountain, it gives you the imagery of trying to maneuver. Sometimes you get flipped over and you get thrown out of your raft or out of your canoe. Thankfully, you get back on and you continue the journey. And sometimes that's how leadership is like. You get knocked off, but you don't get drowned, as it were. and you always have people with you. So you
Yeah.
don't go canoeing by yourself.
Right.
That's a
Right.
dangerous.
Yeah, yeah.
In the same way
Mm-hmm.
that you wouldn't take the risk of going canoeing by, although some people do that foolishly,
Right.
and they can't find them sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way, people may lose you as a leader if you try to lead by your own self.
Right. Right.
So fill up your canoes with people
Mm-hmm.
with the same vision and
Right.
intent,
Right.
and thankfully, in that case, you may get flipped over, bunks against the rocks.
Mm-hmm.
You might get some cuts and bruises,
Mhm,
because in the role of leadership,
Yeah.
you get
Yeah.
those kinds of things happening as a
Yeah.
good leader.
Mm-hmm.
But you always come out of it, fulfilled, energized,
Yeah. Yeah.
accomplished,
Mm-hmm.
because you have maneuvered the canoeing in the cycle
Mm-hmm.
of your mountains, as it were. So let's journey together on this exciting trip
Yes.
of leadership.
Yeah.
I said leadership is the best ship to be on.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, Reverend John.
Thank you kindly.
You are tuned into Hope 103.1 FM, and we thank you for being a part of today's program. And we look forward to another excellent session next week, Wednesday. Thank you for staying logged on, and God bless you. Have a wonderful afternoon.